There were signs of multiple blows from a heavy object.
This is a sustained, violent assault.
Such a quiet, beautiful village. The fact that there was a murderer on the loose was really scary for people.
4,500 occupants of local homes in the area were questioned. She was well known, well liked, well loved. Very difficult to imagine anyone would target her.
As far as picture-perfect villages go, Bosham in West Sussex is up there with the best of them.
Bosham is a really picturesque, beautiful village. A lot of people from London have their second houses down here, so there's a lot of money down here as well.
It's predominantly a sailing village. A lot of sailing goes on in Bosham. People come from quite a way locally to go sailing in Bosham.
As a quaint coastal town, Bosham attracts its fair share of visitors.
A lot busier in the summer. Loads and loads of people come around to visit the area. But in this area, in the heart of the village, if you like, it's a pretty close-knit community, and people look out for each other, and it's just, it's just quite a typical sort of English village, I'd say.
The demographic is mainly of an elderly nature. There is the Chichester Harbour, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty, where a lot of the locals would go to sail, take lovely strolls and walks along the harbour. Especially in the summer months, it's more attractive for the tourists because of the lovely weather we get here in the south coast.
Crime is so low in Bosham, there are often months with nothing reported.
I remember being told by the police there hadn't been a crime recorded in Bosham for 6 months. So not a robbery, nothing, not a car broken into.
But in a village where everyone knows everyone, when the unthinkable happens, it tears a community apart.
Police are investigating after the body of a woman was found dead in a multi-million-pound property in a Hampshire village. The death is currently being treated as suspicious.
The news broke overnight that a woman was found in a home in Bosham.
The first that I knew that something had happened, there were multiple police cars and ambulances, which in Bosham it's unusual even to see one police car from week to week around the village, so that we obviously knew that something had happened, something had gone on.
At 10 a.m, 5 days after Christmas, Sussex police receive a 999 call to a large rural property in the village.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
The distraught caller reveals there's a woman dead in bed.
Obviously, the paramedics and police were called and they responded. They found a female in bed with clearly significant head injuries where she'd been struck numerous times with a blunt instrument.
The details from the police came in that the lady who had been found had been bludgeoned to death with an object. Her face was smashed in.
And it was clear at that point that this was a murder investigation.
It is quickly established the deceased woman is not the owner of the sumptuous property, as they are away for Christmas. So who is the woman? And who would want her dead?
There was a little bit of panic in the village because this sort of thing doesn't happen in Bosham.
It's such a quiet, beautiful village that the fact that there was a murderer on the loose was really scary for people.
Suddenly there was all this activity going on, lots and lots of police cars and everything. And of course, within no time, everybody knew there had been a murder. And there was a lot of gossiping and guesswork and so on.
As a journalist for the local newspaper at the time, Kelly Wickham was more used to reporting on village fates, but now found herself at the centre of a murder investigation.
Rumours started emerging about who could possibly have committed such a crime in this area. There were many speculations that came about, such as, why was the victim there? She didn't own the property. Where was the property owner?
A woman murdered while house-sitting a property in a seaside village has been named as Valerie Graves. Sussex police said that a post-mortem examination had not yet been carried out, but the woman is believed to have died of head injuries.
She just turned 55 on Christmas Day 2013, 4 days before her death. She originally was from London, had moved to Scotland to set up her home and a business up there, but returned down south to look after her elderly mother Eileen and spend more time with her family. She had 2 children, 2 grandchildren.
She had lived in Scotland for about 10 years and she was a local artist up there.
Police soon established that Valerie was looking after the house over the festive period with her mum, her sister and her sister's partner.
Things I would be considering en route to that particular crime scene would be who did find Valerie and under what circumstances? Who was the last person to see Valerie alive? Was there any sign of any struggle, any sign of any forced entry? If there's no sign of forced entry, then you may start thinking, well, was the premises insecure or is this something that's occurred inside the family home? So was there a dispute that had taken place? So until you've kind of spoken to the family, you can't rule them out, but you can't rule them in as well.
With the identity of their victim now known, police need to establish who would want her dead. Investigators immediately look at the hours leading up to the discovery of her body.
The night of the 29th of December was rather like any other. Normal watching of television. In fact, it was 10 p.m. that Mrs. Graves took her iPad and a book to bed. She was the first to go to bed. She was staying on the ground floor at the back of the house.
We understand in the morning her sister woke up with her partner. Her partner decided to go down to the farm shop to get some breakfast goods. Noticed that the bedroom door was slightly ajar, didn't think anything of it. He went out to the shops. Her sister then went in to check on Valerie and sadly found her clearly deceased in bed.
There were many rumours circulating about why did nobody hear her scream? Was this an inside job? Was there somebody in the house perhaps that knew what had happened? It was a really strange time because a lot of fingers were being pointed in a lot of directions.
Certainly at the beginning, you have to keep a very open mind in relation to what may have happened. And unfortunately, that involves including, were family members involved in this? And so you have to sort of hold them at arm's length to a certain extent, ask them a number of questions in relation to their movements.
Intense questioning of Valerie's family begins.
I do remember conversations about the fact that the family hadn't heard anything upstairs and she was downstairs, and a lot of people were like, well, how did they not hear anything? Was it something to do with the family? Was there more to it than that? It was, obviously people were speculating.
Initial reports into her death reveal a brutal attack.
The injuries to Mrs. Graves were akin to a high-speed head-on collision.
So how could no one in the house have heard anything?
You have that gut feeling, you sense when you're speaking to people, looking at them in the eye, as to whether or not you think they are involved. And obviously, it'll be a very traumatic scene for the family there, and very unlikely that you're going to get crocodile tears under those circumstances. And again, you want to know what sort of relationship the family have with Valerie and why would they want to do that. So I think, whilst you can't rule them out straight away, you get a quick sense of whether or not they're involved.
Speculation and theories about the motive escalate. But as the family is ruled out, suspicion falls on the local villagers.
There was always a slight fear in the back of your mind that it could be someone that you knew in the village and that they might still be on the loose.
The feeling everywhere seemed to be that of panic, worry, apprehension. Nobody could quite believe that somebody could be murdered, especially while sleeping in their own bed over the Christmas period. People just felt unsafe, really. Would this person attack again? Who was next?
In the pretty coastal village of Bosham, news is spreading that artist Valerie Graves has been brutally murdered while house-sitting over Christmas.
I work for some elderly clients that live in Bosham Home, and they were absolutely petrified because they're both in their 80s. The realisation that there's obviously a murderer out there, that the lady had been murdered in her sleep and they didn't know why.
When the details did come out, and you realise the gravity and the viciousness of the attack, it was quite worrying at the time. For a few months, everyone was sort of watching themselves or looking over their shoulders a little bit, thinking, could it be him? Could it be her?
With a murder investigation underway, police need to consider who would want to harm Valerie. Due to tides and flooding in the village at that time of year, police believe it's unlikely to have been an opportunist burglar. Meaning one thing, the killer has to be local.
The weather was particularly miserable, lots of local floods going on, and it's not the sort of area that passing traffic would go through. You have to sort of go out of your way to get into Bosham. And so I would imagine over that period, it was almost a kind of a lockdown in that area where the locals would just stay there and no one would come to visit unless it was to visit family and friends.
The area was pretty flooded. Not many visitors would have come to the area at this time of the year. It's Christmas. People would be spending time with their families together. And there was no real need for visitors, so the speculation was it must have been somebody local.
With the community the centre of a major investigation, everyone is a suspect.
The police came knocking on everybody's doors, and literally everybody. I mean, they came with the two, and they would interview each member of the family separately.
Police have several avenues in which to explore.
You'd also want to know who else has access to that address. So we know that the occupiers are away on holiday. A few phone calls could easily establish where they are and whether they had opportunity to get back to the address. But you're also thinking, well, who would do this and why would they do this? You know, Valerie was 55 years of age. She was in bed. She posed no threat to anyone. And so why would somebody do this? And you then start thinking about who lives in the area that could possibly have the motive to do this.
Having ruled out Valerie's family and the owners of the house, who were abroad, Valerie's body is taken for a post-mortem examination. Could this lead provide clues as to the cause of death and the sort of person who would commit such an atrocious crime?
The thing that all post-mortems are looking for is a medical cause of death. Physically, why is this person dead? But the forensic post-mortem also looks at, in more detail, the injuries present, patterns of injury, what the likely implement that may have caused them was, when they may have occurred, and really trying to get a much more clear narrative of the events surrounding this person's death. The expertise is in what sort of weapon was it, how much force was used, have they defended themselves.
The principal injuries were to her head. I'm looking at the pathology report now. There was extreme complexity to the wounds, signs of multiple blows from a heavy object, impossible for the pathologist to determine just how many blows.
It's a physical effort to strike someone multiple times with sufficient force to damage them. It is not an easy task, and it is not something that can be achieved in a second or two. This is a sustained, violent assault.
The injuries that not only cause laceration of the skin, but also complete disruption of the central facial skeleton of the jaw, together with depressed fractures of the skull, with extending fractures to the base of the skull. And there was a patterned injury to the left side of the forehead, showing a semicircle, which, in the pathologist's opinion, would be consistent with the application of force from the round end of a hammer.
If somebody has died as a result of multiple blows with a hammer to the head, it will be clear from the size and shape of the injuries that that is what occurred. The normal head of the hammer is going to leave round to oval lacerations and abrasions when it strikes the body.
Having discovered Valerie was battered to death with a hammer, tragically the post-mortem reveals how she tried to fight off her attacker.
There was a level of defensive injuries sustained to Mrs. Graves, her left hand that she must have raised above her head to shield her head from the blows, revealed extensive bruising to the back of her hand, together with fractures of 2 of the bones of that hand.
Police still cannot believe no one in the house heard the attack, but now they have a new focus. Could the hammer reveal clues as to the perpetrator? And does the killer still have it?
You then have a cursory search around the premises to make sure that the weapon hasn't been left by the offender, because that could yield some forensic opportunities. And then you work your way into the grounds of the premises and bring in sufficient officers to conduct that search, which will include lifting up drains, looking at people's bins, going through people's gardens, and then just increasing out from the crime scene itself in case the offender has taken the weapon with them and then discarded it en route back to wherever they come from.
With the pressure on to find a hammer-wielding killer, local tradespeople are under the spotlight.
When I got interviewed by the police, it's because I was working for my elderly clients, so they'd obviously lived in the area, and I worked for them, so they were interviewing everybody that was in the local vicinity. So, you know, they wanted to know exactly what make of hammer that I had in the van, and yeah, it was quite worrying.
And it isn't long before their hunch pays off and police make an announcement.
A man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of an artist who was found dead at a property she was house-sitting over the Christmas period.
He lived very close to the scene of the crime, together with the fact that his occupation was manual, he was a labourer, may well have led the police to arrest him.
With a man being questioned, police continue to build their case and look for evidence.
They'll also be doing other forensic examinations within the crime scene, so there will be a number of fingerprints, for example, that may turn up within the house that are alien to that address. But it could be a window cleaner, it could be somebody who's done work in that address previously. And so these inquiries need to be bottomed out. And sometimes if you get a fingerprint of an individual together with an account that cannot be corroborated and they're not alibied, then that will give sufficient grounds for the police to arrest that individual and put further questions to them under caution.
The arrested man is interviewed extensively by police.
Despite the fact he spent some time in police custody, he was fully exonerated.
Police are back to square one. But then a discovery is made.
A weapon was found about 600 metres away from the home. It was that of a red claw hammer.
The finding of the hammer was absolutely crucial. It had the blood of Mrs. Graves on it, and therefore was the murder weapon.
And the hammer itself had been exposed to the elements for a couple of days, which means the opportunity to yield forensic evidence is reducing daily. But that said, the scientists were able to yield a DNA profile confirming Valerie's DNA. And then what the scientists also found was a very small partial DNA, and all they could say was that it related to a male individual.
Police now believe for certain Valerie's killer was male. Who is he? And why would he want Valerie dead? Investigations ramp up a notch and the search for the owner of the hammer begins.
The hammer was a 16-ounce forged steel claw hammer, the sort of hammer you'd find from any DIY store. But to show the depth of the police investigation, they contacted Screwfix, who are the company who manufactured this hammer, and then trawled through the records of those suppliers who had sold this type of hammer and then tried to eliminate purchasers from their inquiries.
The risks around having a partial profile is obviously you don't know who it belongs to, and actually it could be an innocent profile. So it could have been, the shopkeeper that sold that hammer. It could be their profile. It could be somebody who's borrowed that hammer. So it may not necessarily link to the murderer, but at least it gives you an idea as to who you want to speak to that may have had contact with that hammer, and then that can then lead on to further inquiries.
With a partial DNA profile on the hammer, every male in the surrounding area is suddenly the focus of police attention.
The next step then is to start looking at males within the area, matching a certain criteria, who they're then going to ask to come forward and voluntarily give their DNA. It's a very expensive and time-consuming process.
Everybody was asked to come and volunteer, including people such as the postman, people that live nearby, anybody in the area.
They set up a mass DNA screening process where they asked local men from the age of 17 and upwards to come to a location, bring their ID with them, give them a thumbprint, and then offer a DNA sample that can then be checked against the partial male DNA profile that the police already had, so that they could either be ruled in or ruled out of that investigation.
So the response locally was outstanding because there was a joint desire in this small village town of Bosham that they wanted a culprit caught, not just, of course, for Mrs. Graves and her friends and family, but because they had, on the face of it, a very dangerous man out loose.
There was DNA testing stations set up around the village. Myself and a few friends, and there's loads of us all went to, everyone that I know of went and got tested. I don't think anyone refused or didn't go. I think it was the sort of thing that actually, do you know what? If you haven't got anything to hide, then you've got no problem going and doing a DNA test.
Months of DNA screening takes place in Bosham and the surrounding villages.
So the police will do all they can to try and detect this crime. They need to do this for the family, but also to reassure the community that there isn't somebody dangerous still out and about. So they'll be undertaking all sorts of inquiries. The forensic searches alone will take, many weeks, if not months. And then with those samples will take many more months to then try and establish whether any DNA can be taken from those samples.
But as time ticks away, the hunt for Valerie's killer goes cold.
The police were at a loss. There were no new leads. Nobody had come forward with any more information.
5 years after her murder, Valerie's family, the police, and the villagers of Bosham are left fearing her killer will never be found.
So they were mystified, absolutely mystified. Who could have wanted this lady harm?
It's 5 years since the murder of Valerie Graves in the quaint coastal resort of Bosham in West Sussex, and police are no nearer to a suspect or a motive.
At first, we thought there might be a quick outcome to solving the crime because it's quite a heinous crime, but there was nothing at all for weeks and then months and then ultimately years.
Having found a partial DNA profile of a male on a hammer believed to be the murder weapon, police have spread their net around the surrounding villages in the hunt for a suspect.
It led to thousands of hours of police work. 4,500 occupants of local homes in the area were questioned. 600 statements were taken. 3,059 males were eliminated by large-scale DNA screening.
In December 2018, I had a statement from the police renewing their appeal to find Valerie's murderer 5 years on. It was a really good statement. They were offering a substantial reward for any information at all. So for me, this was my front page story for that week. It was Christmas. It was a quiet news week anyway. And this was a real heartfelt story that I felt people needed to read about, even at this time. It might just jog someone's memory. It might just nudge them to remembering something that perhaps they felt was insignificant, but that would help police lead to an arrest at last and help the family put this to bed at last.
The police can't solve this on their own. They do need the assistance of the community, and quite often they will use the media to support them with that. Sadly, at times we have to offer a financial incentive for people to come forward, so it's not unusual for a reward to be put up for information that would lead to the arrest and prosecution of the offender. But you hope in cases like this that really do trouble the community that, you know, somebody, if they had information, they would come forward and they wouldn't be motivated by money.
With no clues as to who killed Valerie, police take a step back and re-examine the moments leading to her death. The attack had been so ferocious, so how had no one in the house heard a thing?
So this was a large house. Her sister and her mother and her sister's partner were sleeping in bedrooms upstairs. Valerie was sleeping downstairs in a ground floor bedroom where there were patio doors that then led on to the back garden. At that point, we know that somebody then entered those patio doors and then sadly, brutally murdered her with a blunt instrument.
Police dig a little deeper into their victim.
The profile of Valerie Graves did surprise us all as a victim. She was just an ordinary person, for as far as we know, had no reason to be murdered in such a way or at all.
Valerie had spent a few days looking after the sumptuous property off Smuggler's Lane with her sister, sister's partner, and her mum. And December 29th, 2013 was a quiet night in.
We know that Valerie and her family were in the house. They pretty much stayed in that evening to watch TV, as most families do. I think they were probably getting tired of the Christmas period. You know, Christmas had followed, birthday celebration had taken place, and it was a normal evening. So they'd all watched TV, and then by about 10 o'clock that evening, they all put themselves to bed.
Mrs. Graves was found by her sister the following morning. Initially, she thought that her sister was sleeping in. She shouted out, her door was slightly ajar, the door to her bedroom, and there was no response. She thought perhaps she was lying in. And it was only later when she went in through that door, she saw Mrs. Graves' legs sticking out under the duvet and realised that she was cold. And in panic, of course, naturally, she then rang the police.
Was this a planned murder? Had Valerie been targeted?
For me, there would be a number of hypotheses. The first one is that this is possibly a family member. You know, there'd been a dispute that evening and things have got out of hand and, you know, and unfortunately, Valerie's been assaulted. Another hypothesis is that she was targeted, but you then think, well, who would know she was there? This isn't her home address, so is she under surveillance by somebody? Is a relationship that's gone wrong in the past that somebody is looking to assault and injure Valerie?
Well, the police found it extremely difficult to ascertain why someone would attack Mrs. Graves. She was well known, well liked, well loved, and they found it very difficult to imagine anyone would target her.
Police had already ruled out Valerie's distraught family and find nothing in her background which could suggest someone holds a grudge against her.
They thought, perhaps naturally, that it was a case of mistaken identity, an attacker wanting to seek vengeance on someone for some reason.
The people that owned the house, there were all sorts of rumours that went round about them and hitmen and all sorts of silly rumours.
Rumours even spread that the house had been advertised on a site for swingers wanting sex parties and that the family had been there at the wrong time.
There was a lot of wild rumour and speculation at the time. Some of it completely untrue, some of it perhaps a little bit more close to the truth.
But with no real clues coming forward, police home in on one explanation.
Some of these villages, people are of the mindset they don't have to lock their doors, whereas if you live in a city centre, you're probably more likely to do that. Was this an opportunist burglar who just happened to be in the area? Again, unlikely, I would have thought, because it's such a remote location, and therefore Was it a burglar who knew exactly what they were going for? Because they knew that the occupants were away.
Police now believe Valerie's murder was the result of a burglary gone wrong, and that the burglar knew the owners were due to be away. But even that theory throws up questions.
What seemed rather peculiar was that if it was a burglary, why was nothing taken? Seems rather a lot of effort and savagery, to want of a better word, to then leave empty-handed. So they were mystified, absolutely mystified.
Having already tested thousands of locals for their DNA and come up blank, and despite offering a reward for information leading to an arrest, police are still no closer to a suspect. And then, everything changes.
On the 10th of July 2019, Cristian Sabu was arrested at his home address in Romania. He was asked whether he'd killed Valerie Graves.
But who is Cristian Sabu? And what would he know about such a brutal and bloody murder all those years ago? 5.5 years after the brutal murder of grandmother Valerie Graves in the village of Bosham, West Sussex, there's been a development.
The police got in touch with us in July 2019 to let us know that an arrest had been made for Valerie's murder. This came as a huge shock to everybody. It seemed to come out of nowhere at all.
Hearing the name Valerie Graves come up again in the news was quite a shock, and yeah, hearing that they'd made an arrest.
The man is 28-year-old Cristian Sabu. But what had led to an arrest of a man in Romania so long after the murder?
Years had passed since the brutal murder of Valerie, and the police finally had a breakthrough in that they had been contacted by email by a lady in Transylvania, in Romania, indicating that her husband was responsible for the murder.
But who is he? Did he kill Valerie? And why?
What the police have managed to establish is back in 2013, Cristian Sabu had moved from Romania over to England and was living in a caravan on the A27 in West Sussex, very close to Bosham. Some suggestion he was looking for work, maybe done a bit of scrap metal dealing, but also some local odd jobs as well in the area.
Cristian Sabu left the UK and went back to Romania. That is where he lived with his partner, had a child, lived a normal, as it turns out, law-abiding life.
But 5 years later, Cristian Sabu's partner and mother of his 2 children tips off police that her husband is the killer.
When the police receive information like this, you have to be very cautious in the first instance. You have to question what the motive is for this female to come forward and say that Cristian Sabu was responsible for the murder. I understand they were going through some matrimonial difficulties at that time. So, you know, was her motive to try and, get him into trouble when perhaps he may have been an innocent person?
His wife had seen on Google that he'd been searching about the murder.
He'd been checking out the reporting of the Valerie Graves murder in Bosham back in 2013. And at that time, her and her husband were living just down the road on the A27 in West Sussex.
And she recognised the hammer that he'd been looking at. And she confronted him and asked him, isn't this the hammer that you had in England?
But reporting her suspicions to police is not enough to arrest Cristian Sabu for murder. They need irrefutable proof to secure a European arrest warrant to bring him back to the UK. Focus turns back to the hammer found discarded near the crime scene. Could this now hold the key to solving the case?
What the police did have was this partial male DNA profile, which could either implicate or eliminate Christian Sabu very, very easily if we had his DNA.
But Christian Sabu appears to have lived a crime-free life. His DNA is not on the UK or European police database, so they turned to his partner for help.
The police had to think long and hard as to how were they going to get a DNA sample from Christian Sabu without alerting him. Because if we do alert him, then, without arresting him, he could disappear and then we may never catch him. And so what they asked for through the Romanian police and Christian Sabu's wife was to get DNA samples from his 2 children, which could then show a familial link to the partial DNA profile. And that's what they did.
And the results changed the course of the now cold murder investigation.
It came back as a likeliness that the partial DNA profile that they had found on the hammer was linked to Christian Sabu.
And then, of course, under a European arrest warrant, to bring Mr. Sabu, to his credit, without any fuss, he didn't object, he cooperated fully, and he was then brought to England.
I felt really sorry for his wife. Finding out this news must have been really horrific. This is someone that she's been married to for some time, she has children with. It must have been a real devastating blow to her. She must have feared for her own safety and for her children. I can't imagine what was going through her mind at the time. It must have been really horrible. And I imagine she was probably torn as well. This is the man that she's married to, that she no doubt loves. And she's probably in a really difficult situation.
On 19th July 2019, Christian Sabu is extradited to the UK.
The feeling in the village and the surrounding areas was just pure relief. People felt like at last this had been solved.
Sabu appears at Brighton Magistrates Court, charged with the murder of Valerie Graves.
Mr. Sabu presented as a thoroughly normal man. Uncomplicated. He was uncomplicated from the moment I met him. He was quiet. He wasn't a man of many words, though of course we had an interpreter. He still was not a man who spoke much. He was still, I thought, even with all the years, he was 22 at the time of the incident, 28 when I met him. He was still in shock. That was my belief about what had happened. He couldn't explain it to himself. And he was remorseful.
The man standing before court is at odds with the description of such a brutal killing.
He basically admitted the crime. He said that, he had little money. He was aware of the house. He knew that there were valuables inside that house. And more importantly, he knew that the owners were away over the Christmas period. So when he broke in, he was surprised to see Valerie, who confronted him. He had the hammer in his possession, and sadly, he then beat her with that hammer.
In November 2019, Christian Sabu takes the stand at Lewes Crown Court.
It was always the intention that he would be pleading guilty to the murder of Mrs. Graves.
He did say that he felt bad about it. He didn't mean to hurt her. He told the court how he had something to drink, cycled to the property in the belief that the property was empty. He'd gone there to burgle the place effectively, and he was shocked to find Valerie there. He said that he panicked, and that's when the attack took place. He said that he'd never meant to hurt her.
What remains perhaps a mystery to this day is why Mr. Sabu, on realizing that there was someone in that room and in the house, simply didn't turn and leave. But he did strike her several times with extreme force. And I think only he will know what was going through his mind, but clearly full of panic Alcohol, panic, stupidity.
Summing up the case, the judge accepted that Sabu had not intended to kill and sentenced him to 24 years in prison.
The judge on sentencing Christian Sabu said this: Mrs. Graves' head injuries were so severe that her maximum survival time would have been less than an hour. This was a sustained attack, and the terror and trauma for her in the final few minutes of her life is unimaginable. You had gone to those premises intending to burgle them, to steal from a safe you believed contained a lot of money. You took with you the hammer. You say you had been told the owners were away and therefore were unaware that Valerie, her mum, her sister and her sister's partner would all be in the house. It appears you entered the house via the patio doors in the room in which Mrs. Graves was sleeping. When you realized your mistake, namely that the room was occupied, rather than simply running away in the hope you couldn't be identified by a woman waking from sleep, you launched this horrific attack on Mrs. Graves, who had been asleep in that room. It was your dishonesty and greed that took you to the house. It was your cowardice and lack of morality that caused you to kill Valerie Graves.
7 years since the murder of Valerie Graves, the village of Bosham is slowly returning to normal, but the crime still lingers over them.
Although this had gone on for such a long time, it was in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. There was always that feeling of who did it. And I'm sure many of the men in the area perhaps felt they might have been looked at.
I mean, I was very glad that he got caught, because it meant you can just go back to normal life. Whereas before, you do have this niggle in the background that somebody's murdered somebody from locally, because who else would go there? For a long time, we did think it must be somebody around here. I mean, who else could have done it?
I think the general feeling was one of relief that actually, you know, the chap had been found and the family could get some peace. Also that it wasn't someone in the village. I think that was, you know, even after all that time, I think that was still a bit of a relief that it wasn't a chap living up the road or, you know, someone you may know.
And the family of Valerie Graves can finally try to rebuild their lives.
We have had to endure 6 years of waiting, not knowing if anyone would ever be brought to justice for this cowardly act. Mum was very much loved by our family, but sorely missed by us all.
The coastal village of Bosham, tucked neatly within a labyrinth of tidal inlets that form Chichester Harbour in West Sussex, has long occupied a specific, protected niche in the British cultural consciousness. It is a landscape that appears entirely insulated from the abrasive, unpredictable mechanics of modern urban violence. To the casual observer, or to the affluent professionals who populate its shoreline, Bosham presents itself as an idealized canvas of historical continuity. Here, flint-fronted cottages dating back to the Georgian and alternate Tudor eras lean shoulder to shoulder against narrow, unlit lanes that have wound their way through the topography for centuries. The geography of the village is dictated entirely by the water. Its daily rhythms are governed by the macro-tidal environment of the 13 English Channel, where expansive mudflats are swallowed and exposed by the brackish sea, with mathematical predictability twice a day. This pastoral aesthetic was so pure, so unblemished by the standard markers of industrial or suburban development, that British television networks repeatedly utilized the village as the visual template for fictional utopian hamlets where violence only ever occurred as a stylized narrative device. The social pact shared by the residents of Bosham relied heavily on this geographic insulation. It was a community where front doors were habitually left unlocked, where expensive yachts remained unmonitored at their timber moorings, and where the dark undercurrents of the wider world were treated as distant, abstract concepts that only affected other, less fortunate populations. It was into this deeply insulated setting that 55-year-old Valerie Graves arrived in the cold, damp twilight of December 2013. Valerie was an individual who had spent her entire life operating outside the rigid, conventional structures of suburban corporate existence, described by those who knew her intimately as an eternal student and an exceptionally gifted, free-spirited fine artist. Her life had been a continuous journey of creative exploration and personal expression. For over a decade, she had resided in the rural expanse of Roxburghshire, Scotland, where she owned and operated an independent craft studio and contemporary gallery. Her artistic output, ranging from expressive textiles to intricate ceramic work, was deeply reflective of the raw, untamed northern topography she inhabited, characterized by rich, organic textures and an uncompromising honesty. However, by the winter of 2013, her personal trajectory underwent a major, selfless realignment. Recognizing the accelerating physical vulnerabilities of her 87-year-old mother, Eileen, Valerie made the conscious decision to pause her independent artistic pursuits in Scotland and return to the south coast of England, settling temporarily in Bracklesham Bay to assume the exhausting, emotionally demanding responsibilities of a primary familial caretaker. She was a maternal anchor for her family, a grandmother, a sister, and a daughter whose daily focus was entirely consumed by the quiet, unglamorous labor of domestic care and the preservation of her mother's dignity. She had no proximity to criminal subcultures, no complex financial entanglements, and no history of interpersonal malice that could ever hint at a violent future. She was a woman of peace, entering a village of peace. The physical arena for this tragic intersection of safety and vulnerability was a grand, multi-million-pound luxury mansion, known locally as Hove 2, situated at the absolute dead end of Smuggler's Lane, a highly secluded, unlit gravel track located on the rural periphery of Bosham's waterfront. The estate was a striking monument to contemporary coastal wealth, constructed with vast expanses of architectural glass, exposed oak timbers, and heavy brick pillars, all backing directly onto a quiet, deep-water creek feeding into the main harbor. The legal owners of the property, Malcolm and Jane Chamberlain, were close personal friends of Valerie's family. Having planned a multi-week winter vacation to the tropical environment of Costa Rica over the festive period, they required a trusted, responsible presence to inhabit and secure the sprawling estate against the invasive, damp winter climate of West Sussex. Valerie, along with her elderly mother Eileen, her sister Janet, and Janet's partner, Nigel Akers, viewed the house-sitting assignment as an ideal opportunity for a peaceful family gathering away from their cramped daily quarters. The mansion rapidly became a sanctuary of holiday warmth. On December 25th, the family filled the vast ground-floor reception rooms, cooking elaborate meals, discussing future artistic ventures, and celebrating both Christmas Day and Valerie's 55th birthday simultaneously. The house, with its high perimeter fences and secluded position, felt like an impregnable fortress against the freezing winds sweeping off the water. An architectural sanctuary where the family could insulate themselves within the comfort of elite rural life. But the socio-architectural reality of grand estates like Hove 2 is that the very design features that guarantee maximum privacy and isolation from the public gaze also create conditions of extreme geometric vulnerability. On the night of Sunday, December 29, 2013, the festive atmosphere inside the house had dissipated into the quiet, predictable routines of late evening. The family had gathered in the main lounge to watch television. their soft voices punctuated only by the low whistle of the winter gale outside and the distant lapping of the rising tide against the creek walls. At approximately 10 o'clock p.m., Valerie bid her family good night, descending the short flight of stairs to her designated quarters, a spacious, isolated ground-floor guest suite located at the absolute rear of the mansion's extensive footprint. This bedroom was structurally unique within the house, featuring a wide set of modern double-glazed sliding patio doors that provided a panoramic view of the manicured rear lawn and the pitch-black, unlit water of the adjacent creek. Valerie prepared for bed, entirely comfortable in the absolute privacy of the room. As the remaining members of the household climbed the stairs to the upper levels and turned off the lights, the house was plunged into total darkness, soon enveloped by a dense, freezing sea fog that rolled off the English Channel. The village of Bosham went completely still, its inhabitants sleeping under the protection of their historical insulation, entirely unaware that an opportunistic, predatory actor was currently navigating the freezing mud of the creek, tracking along the unlit boundary of Smuggler's Lane with a heavy, metallic construction tool concealed within his heavy winter jacket. The absolute destruction of Bosham's utopian facade occurred with shattering, silent velocity during the early hours of Monday, December 30th, 2013. The initial transition from normality to catastrophe inside Hove 2 was deceptively quiet, buried beneath the heavy layers of the morning mist. By 10 a.m., the winter sun had struggled to pierce the heavy coastal fog, and the domestic routine on the upper floors of the mansion had resumed its gentle, predictable cadence. Janet Graves, assuming her sister was merely enjoying a well-deserved deep sleep after the physical and emotional exhaustion of the multi-day family holiday and birthday celebrations, walked down the long ground floor corridor to wake her for breakfast. Upon crossing the threshold of the guest suite, the reality of what she witnessed severed her connection to the safe, predictable world she had lived in just moments prior. Valerie Graves lay completely motionless in her bed, her upper body enveloped in bedding that was entirely saturated with deep, coagulating arterial blood. The physical volume of blood was so extensive that it had breached the multiple mattress layers and pooled on the floorboards beneath the iron bed frame. Janet's panicked cries filled the stone corridors of the mansion, alerting her partner and initiating an emergency telephone call to the Sussex police that would permanently alter the criminal history of West Sussex and launch an investigation of unprecedented proportions. When the first responding uniform officers and the elite detectives of the Surrey and Sussex Major Crime Team entered the regular ground floor bedroom, they were confronted by a physical environment defined by a terrifying, paradoxical cleanliness. Valerie Graves had been subjected to a savage, high-velocity bludgeoning while she lay completely supine and defenseless beneath her duvet. The forensic pathologist's subsequent post-mortem report would detail the immense mechanical force of the assault Valerie had sustained. Catastrophic, non-survivable, craniocerebral trauma. Her skull had been fractured into multiple fragments by repeated targeted impacts from a heavy, flat-headed metallic weapon, with the bone incursions causing instant, widespread destruction to the cerebral hemisphere. The nature of the lacerations suggested a weapon with a distinct structural profile, something hard, unyielding, and weighted for heavy impact. Yet, as the forensic archaeologists and scene-of-crime examiners systematically analyzed the perimeter of the bed, they encountered a major investigative problem. There were no signs of a prolonged physical struggle. No furniture had been overturned. The bedside lamps remained standing. The personal jewelry on the dresser was untouched. And there were no substantial defensive wounds on Valerie's forearms or hands, indicating she had been struck down mid-sleep, entirely unaware of the presence of her assassin. The meticulous physical processing of the room's access points quickly identified the precise route of entry utilized by the intruder. The large sliding glass patio doors leading from the bedroom directly onto the rear lawn were found completely unlatched, resting on their runners. There were no tool indentations along the locking mechanism, no hairline fractures in the glass panes, and no indicators of physical force. The killer had simply walked across the soft grass under the cover of the dense, freezing sea fog, tried the handle in the dark, and slid the door open with fluid, silent efficiency, exploiting the family's deep trust in the village's perceived safety. However, as forensic technicians applied advanced laser tracking, high-sensitivity latent print powders, and chemical enhancements like luminol across the entryway, they were met with a baffling dead end. The perpetrator had left no identifiable footwear impressions on the pile carpet, no friction-ridged skin details on the glass panels, and no microscopic clothing fibers on the wooden door frame. The vast amount of blood was completely restricted to the immediate zone of the bed itself, meaning the killer had delivered multiple catastrophic impacts without stepping into the surrounding splash zones or transferring biological footprints to the floorboards. It was a sterile horror, a brutal act of homicide that left almost no actionable trace data behind, suggesting either a professional level of forethought or an extraordinary sequence of criminal luck. The initial phase of the multi-jurisdictional investigation saw Sussex police launch one of the largest physical search operations in the history of the county, deploying hundreds of tactical search personnel, marine search assets, and canine tracking teams to comb the fields, hedgerows, and waterways of Bosham. On January 4th, 2014, exactly 5 days after the murder, search teams achieved what appeared to be the definitive breakthrough of the case. Ditched in the thick winter undergrowth at the entrance of an agricultural driveway on Hoe Lane, approximately 600 meters from the perimeter of Hove 2 officers, recovered a heavy, rusted iron claw hammer. The tool was immediately sealed in a sterile container and rushed to the high-security forensic laboratories in London for urgent, microscopic analysis. The scientific interrogation of the hammer confirmed its status as the primary murder weapon beyond all scientific doubt. The geometric dimensions of the hammer's flat, striking face matched the specific fracture patterns on Valerie's skull, and advanced chemical testing detected microscopic traces of her tissue embedded deep within the recessed joints where the iron head met the wooden handle. However, the weapon had been exposed to days of freezing winter rain and high humidity, which had severely degraded any latent cellular material left by the perpetrator. Using ultra-sensitive DNA amplification and profiling techniques, geneticists managed to extract a highly limited partial male DNA profile from a tiny pocket of skin cells caught near the base of the handle. It was an incomplete, fragmented genetic sequence. While it was highly effective for confirming that the killer was male and could be used to definitively eliminate specific sexual individuals from the inquiry, the profile was far too incomplete to trigger an automatic identity match on the national DNA database. The investigation had hit an unyielding brick wall. The state possessed the physical instrument of death and a partial genetic signature of the perpetrator. But this data existed in a total vacuum, unattached to any known name, photo, or criminal record in the United Kingdom. Faced with a partial DNA profile that refused to match any existing entry on national or international criminal databases, the major crime team was forced to pivot toward an exhaustive, old-fashioned investigation of elimination and local intelligence gathering. In the early months of 2014, the mansion down Smuggler's Lane was transformed from a crime scene into the epicenter of a massive investigative web that extended across the country. Detectives began by constructing a hyper-detailed chronological matrix of Valerie Graves' entire social, professional, and romantic history. Teams of officers were dispatched to Roxburghshire, Scotland, to interview former gallery clients, artistic collaborators, and past partners, searching for any hidden thread of resentment, hidden financial debt, or obscure vendetta that could have followed her down to the south coast. Simultaneously, financial intelligence analysts conducted a deep audit of the homeowners, Malcolm and Jane Chamberlain, exploring whether the murder was actually a targeted contract hit or a corporate revenge plot executed by professionals who had mistakenly targeted Valerie in the dark, believing she was the wealthy mistress of the estate. Every single one of these complex avenues collapsed into nothingness, leaving investigators baffled. The Chamberlains were completely legitimate business figures with zero proximity to the criminal underworld. Valerie was a fundamentally peaceful artist who enjoyed the universal affection of her peers and family. The case had no logical core, no obvious motive, and no suspects with any tangible link to the victim. In January 2014, a 22-year-old local resident was arrested by tactical officers following a series of community tips regarding his erratic behavior and history of minor delinquency in the area. He was subjected to days of intensive, recorded interrogation while forensic scientists rushed his DNA sample through an accelerated analysis against the partial male profile recovered from the claw hammer. The results were negative. His genetic markers did not align with the tool's handle, and he was released without charge, completely cleared of any involvement. The investigation was frozen, paralyzed by the realization that this was an act of completely unanchored, random violence. By the winter of 2014, as the first anniversary of the homicide approached, the psychological landscape of Bosham had decayed from an idyllic sanctuary into an environment of profound mutual suspicion and ambient fear. The historic culture of leaving front doors unlatched and ignoring perimeter security vanished completely, replaced by the widespread installation of high-definition CCTV systems, motion-activated floodlights, and heavy security deadbolts. Neighbor looked upon neighbor with quiet apprehension, the knowledge that a brutal killer was potentially walking the historic lanes of the village created an unceasing undercurrent of community trauma. Detectives had by this point conducted over 9,500 formal interviews, logged thousands of hours of local traffic movements, and analyzed every scrap of communication data crossing the local cell towers on the night of the crime. Yet the identity of the partial DNA donor remained completely elusive. Faced with a complete stagnation of traditional leads, the leadership of the Sussex Police authorized an unprecedented, high-stakes forensic maneuver, a total, voluntary mass DNA screening program, targeting every single eligible male resident within the wider geographic district. It was a roll of the dice on an unprecedented scale, designed to force the killer out of hiding or eliminate the entire local population from the matrix. The logistical scale of the mass screening operation was staggering, transforming the quiet village into a high-throughput genetic collection processing center that dominated local life for months. Police planners mapped out every residential street, agricultural property, caravan park, and local business within a multi-mile radius of Smuggler's Lane. Every male between the ages of 17 and 70 who lived, worked, or had verified physical proximity to Bosham during the festive week of December 2013 was formally requested to report to mobile police clinics established in village community halls. There, trained officers collected a voluntary buccal cheek swab alongside a digital thumbprint, cataloging the data into a dedicated, isolated database designed specifically for the Graves inquiry. The compliance of the local population was nearly absolute, driven by a collective desire to excise the cloud of suspicion hanging over their homes. 2,819 men lined up over the course of several months to surrender their biological profiles to the state. The specialized forensic laboratories processed the samples day and night, isolating the specific short tandem repeat markers required to check for a match against the fragmented DNA profile preserved on the Elementon. Holane Hammer. Yet, as the final analytical runs were completed and the datasets were closed, a profound sense of disappointment settled over the major crime team. Not a single voluntary sample matched the suspect profile. The mathematical certainty was absolute. The killer was not a permanent resident of Bosham. He was not a member of its established social circles, its agricultural workforce, or its affluent maritime community. He was a complete ghost who had entered the geographic coordinates of Smuggler's Lane from an entirely external orbit, leaving behind a digital fragment of code that remained completely unanchored to any identity within the United Kingdom. The resolution of the mystery did not originate from the continuous refinement of British forensic databases, nor did it come from further local surveillance sweeps or community appeals. Instead, the breakthrough emerged 5 years later, breaking through the structural stagnation of the case via the channel of international intelligence sharing and the sudden collapse of a criminal secret across continental Europe. In the early months of 2019, the senior investigating officer of the Sussex Major Crime Team received an encrypted intelligence briefing from law enforcement authorities in Romania. A young woman residing in the northwestern municipality of De had walked into a local police station, driven by an overwhelming sense of personal terror and shifting domestic alliances, to deliver a formal statement that would instantly solve the cold case of Smuggler's Lane. She explicitly implicated her former domestic partner, a 28-year-old itinerant construction laborer named Cristian Sabau. The detailed statement from the Romanian informant provided the crucial tactical context that British detectives had spent half a decade failing to identify. Cristian Sabau was not a calculating assassin or a serial sexual predator targeting isolated properties. He was a low-level, highly disorganized, opportunistic burglar. During the winter of 2013, he had been living in temporary substandard accommodation in West Sussex, operating within a network of informal Eastern European laborers who performed low-wage construction, roofing, and landscaping work for the wealthy property owners of the Chichester district. Crucially, Sabau had previously been hired to perform routine manual labor on the exterior grounds of the Hove 2 estate itself, giving him an intimate knowledge of its structural layouts and blind spots. While operating on the property, his casual observations had intersected with an insidious piece of local underworld exaggeration. A criminal associate had explicitly informed Sabau that the Chamberlain mansion contained a hidden, floor-mounted digital safe packed with hundreds of thousands of pounds in untraceable banknotes and physical gold bullion. To a laborer mired in significant debt and facing immediate financial ruin, this false rumor transformed into an absolute obsession, an easy path to wealth. On the freezing, fog-shrouded night of Sunday, December 29, 2013, Sabau acted upon this delusion. Armed with a heavy iron claw hammer he had stolen from an active construction site earlier that day, intended to be used as a lever to force open windows or pry loose the fictional floor safe, he navigated the dark perimeter of Smuggler's Lane. He slipped through a gap in the rear hedge of the Chamberlain estate, stepping onto the manicured lawn. He was completely unaware that the homeowners were thousands of miles away in Costa Rica, and equally ignorant of the fact that they had permitted Valerie Graves and her family to inhabit the property as house-sitters. Moving through the dense coastal mist, he approached the sliding glass patio doors of the ground-floor guest suite, testing the metal handle in the dark. To his tactical surprise, the door was unlatched. It glided open silently on its tracks, allowing him direct access into the room. Sabau stepped over the threshold into the pitch-black bedroom, operating under the assumption that he was entering an unoccupied wing of the mansion where he could hunt for the safe undisturbed. But as his vision adjusted to the low light reflecting off the coastal fog, he realized he was standing directly over an occupied bed. At that exact moment, Valerie Graves stirred beneath her duvet, disturbed by the sudden drop in room temperature or the soft compression of the carpet beneath Sabau's heavy boots. In that microsecond of physical confrontation, Sabo's rational mind collapsed into absolute panic. He knew that if the woman fully awoke and screamed, her cries would instantly wake the remaining residents on the floors above, leading to his immediate trap and arrest. Seeking only to permanently silence the witness, he raised the heavy iron claw hammer with both hands and struck downward into the darkness with explosive violence. He delivered repeated, high-velocity blows to Valerie's skull while she lay trapped within her bedding, converting a simple residential trespass into an act of murder within a matter of seconds. Once the movement stopped and the room fell silent, Sabo's criminal intent completely evaporated, abandoning any attempt to locate the non-existent safe. He fled out into the freezing night through the open sliding door, running blindly down Smuggler's Lane. He tossed the blood-stained weapon into the overgrown ditch of Hoe Lane before returning to his temporary quarters, fleeing the United Kingdom for Romania within weeks. Confident that by placing a continent between himself and Chichester Harbour, he had permanently escaped the reach of forensic science and the attention of the British authorities. The final phase of the Valerie Graves investigation was an operation defined by flawless international judicial cooperation and high-throughput DNA profiling. Armed with the definitive name and background details provided by the Romanian intelligence file, Sussex police homicide detectives secured a European arrest warrant and traveled directly to the judicial district of Cluj-Napoca. In July 2019, operating in lockstep with elite tactical units of the Romanian National Police, British officers executed a coordinated dawn raid on Sabo's residential property in the town of Dej. Sabo was extracted from his bed and subdued without incident, his face reflecting a deep shock as detectives from West Sussex stepped into his room to read him his legal rights via an interpreter, breaking a 5-year run of perceived safety. The primary operational objective of the arrest team was the immediate acquisition of a verified, high-purity biological reference sample via a standard buccal swab. When this fresh genetic profile was uploaded into the forensic database and compared against the partial, degraded DNA sequence that had sat unresolved on the Sussex major crime files for more than 5 years, the statistical probability analysis returned a definitive result. The genetic markers matched with absolute certainty. The anonymous profile from the handle of the Hoe Lane hammer finally had a name, a legal identity, and a permanent record of guilt that could be brought before a court of law. In November of 2019, following the formal completion of the international extradition process, Christian Sabo was brought before the Bar of Justice at Lewes Crown Court. The Crown Prosecution Service had constructed a comprehensive, undeniable legal narrative, ready to present the jury with a combination of the Romanian witness testimony, the telecommunications data placing Sabo in the wider district during 2013, and the mathematical finality of the DNA match. Recognizing that the forensic evidence had completely dismantled any potential avenue of legal defense, Sabo elected to forego a full trial. He stood within the historic oak dock, keeping his eyes cast downward as his defense counsel entered a formal, binding plea of guilty to the single charge of murder. The sentencing hearing served as a major, solemn closure for a family that had spent 6 years living within a void of unresolved grief and media scrutiny. The prosecution detailed the extreme vulnerability of the victim and the horrific physical force utilized by the defendant, emphasizing that Valerie Graves was an entirely innocent individual who was killed while protecting her family. Judge Christine Lang, presiding over the case, looked directly at Sabo as she delivered her final, binding judgment. She emphasized that his actions were defined by a combination of profound greed, criminal incompetence, and supreme cowardice. A willingness to destroy a human life with a construction tool simply to avoid capture for a burglary he had botched. The court sentenced Christian Sabo to life imprisonment. specifying that he must serve a minimum of 23 years and 272 days before his file could ever be reviewed by a parole board, ensuring he would spend the majority of his adult life behind bars. Today, the historic coastal village of Bosham has slowly reclaimed the quiet, peaceful rhythms that defined its identity for centuries before the tragedy. The sea fog still rolls off the English Channel, blanketing Smuggler's Lane in a thick winter mist, and the luxury yachts continue to bob against their timber moorings along the Chichester Harbor inlets. But the shadow of December 2013 remains a permanent chapter in the history of the landscape. Valerie Graves' legacy stands as a major landmark in the history of modern international forensics. It proved that in an era defined by global mobility and international borders, a criminal can no longer rely on the vastness of geography or the destruction of local biological clues to secure their freedom. We live in a world where our genetic codes are permanent, where international police networks can rapidly bridge the distance between isolated English villages and remote European towns, and where the silent testimony of a degraded DNA strand can wait out the years, ensuring that no matter how far a killer runs, the truth will inevitably find its way back into the light of the law.